Hi everyone, and welcome back to Fantasy Fellowship Con. I'm Sarah. I am the Fantasy Fellowship founder, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with the super inspiring Rosie Hewlett this afternoon. Rosie is the author of the Bookstagram favourite Medusa, a self-published retelling of one of Myth's most infamous figures. Got it here. I was lucky enough to read Medusa back when it was first released in the spring of 2021 and absolutely adored it. It's been incredible to watch as it's become a word-of-mouth sensation and gained a huge amount of worthy hype across social media. Rosie is now an award-winning author with over 1,000 4- and 5-star reviews on Goodreads, and I know there are many of us that cannot wait to get our hands on her next book, which we've had some very exciting hints for. Rosie, thank you so much for joining us today. We have lots of mythology lovers in our community who have been so excited for this, so let's go ahead and start if that's okay with you.
Yes, great, and thanks for having me.
So you are a self-confessed mythology fangirl, so we'd love to know how that all began, if there is a particular myth-related memory that you think started you on the path, and how that led you to where you are now.
It's actually, I have to thank my sister for this, and I think my sister might be watching, so hi Holly if you're there. But yeah, so it was actually her who recommended that I pick classics as a subject at GCSEs because I was trying to choose what I wanted to study. And she just said, you have to study classics because I just know you'll love it. And I didn't really know much about it, and I hadn't really studied any of the myths or anything like that before. But I took her advice because, she's my big sister, and I just thought, okay, I'll do it. And I just immediately just fell in love with it. I just think it's so much fun. I think when you go from, a class of maths and a class of science, which I hated, and then you go into a class about classics, and it's just all the myths and just storytelling and the drama and the gods, and I just loved it immediately. And then I continued on and studied at A level, and then I went and studied at university as well. And I always just loved it. It just never really felt like work. It just felt like something I just loved to read about and couldn't get enough of, really. So yeah, so it kind of all started with my sister.
Been a lifelong love.
Yeah, it really has.
And I didn't get offered classics at GCSE.
I know we're so lucky. It's so few schools offer it now, and I think that's such a shame because I am biased, but I think it's such a great subject because it encapsulates so many different areas because you've got like drama and you've got art and obviously history and politics and just there's so much in it, and I just think it's a great subject. But I was very lucky that our school offered it.
Yeah, I would have been all over that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that leads us in quite nicely to what was it that drew you to Medusa in particular as your first retelling?
I think with Medusa, it was ever since I learnt about the version of her myth where, she's obviously the victim, which is the version that I tell in my story. Ever since I learnt that story, I thought it was such a shame that she's only ever known as the villain. And I think so few people knew of her backstory of she's actually the victim in the story. And I think she's arguably the most famous character in mythology. I think people who know nothing about myth know of Medusa to some capacity. So I just thought it was really interesting that she's so well known but has remained so silent, and there's not really, her voice just isn't in history at all. She's just known as this monster. So I think that had always really interested in me, and I'd always wanted to just reclaim her story and give her a voice. And as well as that, her story is so relevant to today, which is obviously it's really sad, but there's so many women today who go through, though it's not obviously with gods and monsters and everything, there is still that element of, going through similarly to what she went through and then being silenced and demonized and isolated and all of that.
And you did it in such a powerful way. I think that's why I connected to Medusa so much. It's like her voice was just so strong. So like I found the idea that she's stuck in this kind of eternal damnation, watching as her story is passed down through the generations, really powerful. There's something so relatable about false narratives being created about you and not being able to defend yourself. And it really made me connect to her. And I think like to a certain extent, it does for a lot of us. There are countless portrayals of Medusa in modern pop culture as the monster, the enemy, the villain. How important do you think it is that she and so many other women of mythology are finally being given the chance to tell their stories? As we've just been saying, we've had this huge resurgence of them.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's so great that female authors especially are reclaiming female stories from the past that then also shed light on female experiences today. So it's just kind of, there's so many layers of it that is empowering for women, which I think is really great. Like with just saying with Medusa, it's giving her a voice that reclaims her story, but then it also sheds a light on experiences of women today. So I think it's incredibly important, and I think I'm loving that it's just such a resurgence at the moment. There's so many retellings at the moment, it's hard to keep track of them, and I think it's just really great that also it's female authors are reclaiming an area that was so largely dominated by men for so long, and it was men telling the stories, and men kind of like historians and all that. So it's just really nice to see women sort of taking over an area and just really championing it. It's really great.
And I think you were really brave with the writing choices that you made, in that she was kind of like narrating in like a looking back at the past and like watching us now in the like a modern society.
Yes, yeah, I really wanted. Well, I suppose I just always heard her voice in my head like that, like she's talking to you, and she's talking to a modern audience, was always how I heard her voice in my head, and she's kind of been there in the underworld, sort of just watching this all play out, and she's just like, you know what, I've had enough now. I'm going to tell you my side, and I think having that, having her talk to a modern audience, so she's got that awareness of what's going on, made it all the more kind of, I suppose it helped with connecting to modern society, and Medusa kind of pulling those narratives that she does in the story, and she kind of reflects on things that are going on now that was always going on then. So yeah, it all kind of links together.
Like for such a short book, it really does pack a punch, because it's under 200 pages, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Well, I actually, I originally wrote it to be a short story, and I was thinking I might write a few short stories, and make that a book. But then, as soon as I kind of got started with Medusa, I just couldn't stop, and I just kept writing and writing, and I just felt like I had a lot more to say than I realized. So I think it's on the cusp of being a novella, but I think it's on that kind of teetering on the edge of kind of a short book or a long novella. But
And so, talking about the gods and men of ancient Greece, like I know that growing up, whenever I heard their stories, it was always kind of like with a like playful, cheeky, humorous tone, when actually what they were doing was pretty awful, and like all these acts that they're committing. But maybe that's easier for us as a society to like take it in that way, that it's kind of just mischief. So, how hard was it to write Medusa's scene with Poseidon, and how important was it to you to not shy away from how terrible it was for her?
yeah, I think that's a really good point about in these myths that the experience of the women is often quite just brushed over, and essentially what was really horrible things that were happening is just kind of it's just summed up in a sentence or as a plot device or even a punchline, and I think it's just brushed over. It's like, and then he had his way with her, and that's it. And I think it speaks a lot to the time of how women were seen, and how little body autonomy they had, and all that, which is really quite disturbing. But so that was something that I didn't want to just brush over it in Medusa. I really wanted to to face her trauma, and not to shy away from that, because it's an important part of her story and her narrative, and how she becomes who she becomes. But at the same time, I didn't want it to be overtly graphic or anything like that, because I don't think it needs to be to get across the horror of it, which is why I went down the route of the symbolism of the water, and using the sea as a metaphor with Poseidon. And I think that kind of using that metaphor sort of tells you everything you need to know about what's happening without directly saying what is happening. So that was kind of how I tackled that scene. But it's definitely, you've got to be careful with those scenes to make sure you're approaching them in a way that doesn't, it doesn't brush over it, but then is respectful, I suppose.
I think you handled it really well.
Thank you.
So, one of my other favourite things about the book is Medusa's relationship with her sisters. It was very authentically written and really moving. Are there any other female relationships from mythology that you would like to explore one day?
Yes, definitely. I mean, female relationships in myth are what I find most interesting, because I think they're so overlooked, because obviously myths were written and told by men, so they only focus on relationship between men or relationship between men and women, and it's the women's relationships that are just always overlooked.
So true.
Yeah, and they're never explored, and there's so many fascinating women in myth whose paths will have crossed and we don't know anything about it. And I think, for example, like Atalanta and Medea, they would have crossed paths because they were both traveling with Jason and the Argonauts at one time. And I think they are two women in myth who are so strong and powerful and interesting, but we don't know anything about their crossover. And that's one of the reasons why, one of the many reasons why I wanted to write Medea's story next, because I wanted to look at Medea and Atalanta and how they would play out when they met each other. But yeah, there's so many that I'd love to explore.
That is very exciting. Wasn't already excited. Were there any elements of writing Medusa's character that you struggled with?
Not really. I think for so long I'd wanted to write her story that when I actually finally sat down to write it, it just all came out quite quickly. I think I could just hear her voice in my head, and when I started writing, I just kind of didn't stop until I was done. So in a way, it was actually quite easy to write, I suppose. I just kind of, it was quite cathartic, I think, to get all that kind of her angry voice down on paper. So yeah, it was a really fun experience.
It definitely felt like you knew her, because I remember it was only a couple of years ago that I ever realised that Medusa was raped. My first experiences of her character was so early, and it was kind of like the Percy Jackson and stuff like that. So it wasn't only, it was only like in the recent years that I feel like I've got to know her.
Yes, yeah, it's amazing how people just didn't know that part of her story. But I mean, now that I feel like she's having a moment now, because it was Jessie Burton's retelling, and then Natalie Haynes's retelling is coming out, so it's clearly Medusa's time.
It's just amazing that it's like we've chosen not to know her. That's like what is wrong with us?
Yeah, just chosen to see her as a villain, and I just think it's
Yeah,
a shame, because she's so much more interesting than that.
completely. As you've just mentioned, I was so excited to hear that you're working on a Medea novel, but I have to admit, hers is one of the myths that I am most fascinated by, but also very disturbed by. Her story is so dark and tragic. I imagine it must be quite hard to get into that headspace to write. And is there any more you can tell us about the book?
Yes, I mean, I can't say too much about Medea, but she's always been a character, the woman in myth that I've been most fascinated by, because her story is there's so much that happens, there's so much that she goes through, she's so powerful, and I've always been fascinated by her, and I've always wanted to tell her story, and I think it's that idea. She obviously it is a very dark story. I'm not going to give spoilers in case people don't know, but it's a very dark story, and I think it's that, well, there's a quote in Medusa about monsters are made and not born, and I think that's definitely what I'm interested in as a writer, is how are these monsters made, and how does this woman go from being a princess, kind of innocent, to then how she ends up in her myth. I don't believe that it's just this kind of evil woman, femme fatale. That's just not how it is. She's a complex, interesting, fascinating character that clearly goes through a lot of trauma and difficult times to become what she does. And I think that's what really interests me as a writer, is how she's gone through that, and to how I can go through that in my writing, and kind of keep an audience engaged, and almost sort of keep them on side. But it's been really fun writing her story, and again, like Medusa, I think I heard her voice so clearly in my head, and I feel like I can it was just kind of went down on paper so quickly. And I think as a writer, that's when you know when you're writing the right story, because it flows. And I think that Medea did, just like Medusa. I just kept writing until it was beginning to end, and I just couldn't stop.
I love that you're being so brave with these who you're choosing. It's amazing. I'm so excited. Is there a whole list that you've got that you're hoping to get to at some point?
There's lots that I definitely want to write. I think there's so many females in myth that I'd love to write, and I was also, but like I said before, it's also what just feels right. I think sometimes I've sat down to write something, and it's just not come to me, and it just hasn't felt like the right time. And I think once I start writing, I know which the characters that I want to write, and which are the voices that feel authentic, because I always want it to feel authentic. I don't want it to feel forced, or to feel like yeah, I just want it to feel kind of like it's actually them and them telling their story.
Definitely. I just can't wait to see which ones you do. So we were just talking before about you writing Medusa during lockdown, and can you just tell us about your journey of being a self-published author and kind of like from beginning, like the writing stages and how, because I've seen your reels lately and you kind of approached publishers, didn't you? And then decided to self-publish. So I'd just love to hear as much as possible about it.
Yes, of course. Yeah. I mean, when I wrote Medusa, it was just, I loved writing. I wanted to write her story. And it was, lockdown in the UK, and I just was stuck at home on furlough. So I just thought, well, if I'm gonna ever write her story, it's gonna be now. So I sat down and I wrote it. And it was, all came out very quickly, and I wrote it all. And then I was kind of, when it was done, I was kind of thinking, okay, what now? Because I'd always wanted to be a writer, but I wasn't really sure how you get from here to there. And it felt like a big jump to get to that point of having a published book. And so I kind of did a bit of research, and I didn't even know that you have to have an agent to get published. I just
Yeah.
thought you kind of go to a publisher and be like, please publish my book. But you have to get an agent first, which is a big hurdle in itself, because there's obviously so many aspiring authors and there's only so many agents. And I mean, I approached a few agents for Medusa, but it got turned down, or they just didn't reply. And I think there was a general consensus that the book felt a bit too niche, which now seems quite funny because there's such a
Yeah.
big, like, myth retelling is so big at the moment. So, but yeah, so after I had a few agents turn me down, I just kind of I didn't just want it to live on my laptop. I wanted her story I mean, I wrote her story so it could kind of reclaim her voice, and I wanted people to hear Medusa's voice and to hear her story, and I felt like I kind of owed it to her. So after being encouraged by my family, I decided to self-publish. But again, I didn't know anything about self-publishing. I didn't really know where you start. So I actually used a company called Silverwood Books, and they're really great. They just kind of hold your hand through the whole process, and they just make everything very straightforward. You can definitely do it yourself, but for me, it was just really helpful having people there who kind of knew what they were doing, and helping me through it. And they kind of organized all the different parts, which was really, really helpful. And for anyone who wants to self-publish but is a bit worried about figuring out how to do it, I would recommend using a company like that. And then it kind of suddenly was out in the world, which was incredibly terrifying, because I kind of never really let anyone read my writing. And then I went from not letting even like my partner read my writing to then suddenly publishing it for everyone to read. But it was, yeah, I mean, the response has been amazing, and everyone's been so supportive. And utilizing social media for anyone who's looking to self-publish, I'd say social media is your best friend, like Instagram and TikTok as well. I didn't do much TikTok for Medusa, but there's so many indie authors now who are doing amazing things on TikTok and building up such a great readership for their books, because there's so many, obviously, readers on Instagram and TikTok, and book reviewers as well, who are lovely and always, seem very willing to help. And it's been a bit of a whirlwind really for Medusa. I kind of wasn't really expecting it, but
Yeah.
it's gone very well.
Response has been amazing. And I think as a bookstagrammer, because you messaged me when it was first coming out and got in touch, and I absolutely loved it as soon as I read it. And it's just been like amazing to kind of feel a part of that huge response that it's got across Bookstagram. Like everywhere I looked, it was getting 5-star reviews. All of like the people that I really look up to on there were posting reviews for it, and it was just spreading like wildfire.
Yeah, I did not expect that. I mean, I hope people would like it, but yeah, the response was just, and everyone was just so positive, and just the Bookstagram community is just the nicest community ever. Like everyone is so lovely. And yeah, like when I reached out to people, like you, it was just everyone was so supportive, and was just loving. I mean, it's that kind of symbiotic relationship of readers and writers. It's like we write books for the readers to enjoy, but then we rely on the readers to continue writing books. So it's that kind of, everyone's kind of supporting each other and passionate about reading and books and writing. And it's just,
Definitely. It's an amazing community. Okay, we're going to do a few more light-hearted questions. So, which god or goddess would you pick as a patron and why?
I think there's so many good ones, but I think I'd have to say Hecate or Hecate, how you pronounce it, because the goddess of magic and spells. Just because I think she's very cool and very mysterious, and I feel like nobody would mess with you if she was your patron goddess. I think they would.
Yeah. I don't even know who mine would be because I feel like they all like I used to love Athena, but she's a bitch.
I mean, she has a good days and a bad days. It depends on which retelling.
I've got like two framed pictures of them and they were next to each other and I had to like move one. I was like, that doesn't sit right with me anymore.
Go on a naughty step.
Oh, I love this question that we had submitted. So if you had the power to turn any figure from mythology to stone, who would you choose?
I feel like I'd have to say Poseidon to back up Medusa. I feel like I'd have to have her back there. But then I've also always found Odysseus really annoying.
Oh, okay.
I really don't like Odysseus, and I think my sister and me have always we just find him really annoying, and he just complains all the time, and he's always he's such a hypocrite. So maybe Odysseus. Sorry if there's any Odysseus
That's a
fans
good
in
one.
the
I
audience.
wasn't expecting it, but I like it. Okay, so if you could pick any author to retell any myth, who and which would you choose?
This is a good question. I feel like I feel like Victoria Schwab, the Schwab, she'd do a really good retelling because she does that beautiful Gothic writing style, and I think
Amazing, yeah.
quite a Gothic spin on a retelling, maybe like a Persephone and Hades retelling from her would be really cool. Although I really want to see a Persephone and Hades retelling that doesn't romanticize Persephone and Hades.
So do I.
Yeah,
I want to see less Persephone and
yeah. Like I want to see maybe Persephone and Adonis, who they were both kind of shoved in the underworld by the gods and didn't want to be there, and that kind of love story would be really interesting to me.
Yeah,
So that would be cool.
I would like a retelling of Orpheus and Eurydice.
Yes,
Make
yeah,
that happen, Rosie, please do.
yeah. I'll take note.
Okay, so what are your top 5 mythology book recommendations? They can be classics or retellings.
Oh, well, I've got to say Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, because Song of Achilles is just always, I just love that book.
Favorite book, yeah.
Yeah, it's just when I read it, that's kind of what opened my eyes to how modern authors can reimagine the myths and the history, and I just I love that book. What else? I'm trying to think. I mean, there are only fragments, but I love Sappho's writing, Sappho's poetry from the ancient world. We've only got little fragments that exist, but I think there's something almost kind of magical about that we only have bits of her words, and I think that just makes it all the more fascinating for me. I love that. I love Ovid's Herodes, which is basically Ovid writing letters from the point of view of the women, and I think that they're quite interesting. They're quite fun. How many am I now? I'm 3. I also love it's hard, there's so many. I think Mythos by Stephen Fry is a really good introductor to myth. If you're new to myths and you kind of want a fun way into them, I'd definitely say Mythos by Stephen Fry is a great introductory to all of them.
Read them as like audiobooks as well.
Yes, yeah, the audio. I listen to the audiobooks actually. I'd recommend because it's just his voice is just great. The way he tells them is so funny. And then I'd probably say Ariadne by Jennifer Saint, just because Jenny Saint's been so great at, I think she's really paved the way for this big resurgence of myth retelling popularity. I think the fact that Ariadne's done so well has really helped lift up other authors in this genre. It's because it shows publishers that there is such a hunger for myth retellings, which has been really great. And also Jenny Saint is just so lovely. So yeah.
Aww. It's been amazing with like the Song of Achilles as well, how that, because that was 10, 11 years ago now.
Yeah.
Come back, hasn't it? Come back strong with
TikTok is just
assuming that they've like claimed it as their own.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've just got a couple more questions. The Iliad or the Odyssey? Although I'm wondering if I know what the answer is after your...
Did I give it away? Probably the Iliad. I do love the Odyssey, despite not loving Odysseus. But I'd probably say the Iliad just because I think it has so many great characters in it, and like Achilles and Patroclus and Hector, and there's just so much emotion in that. I just love it. Yeah.
Do you have a translation of the Iliad that you would recommend? Because that's something I've really struggled to find.
Oh, I need to check which one I've got. I feel like I've got multiple copies of it, so I need to check.
Later.
Yeah, I need to. I'll let you know.
Everyone's frantically going to be like writing down all the recommendations that you've just given us in the chat. Okay, so we have a readathon coming up, and we are asking all of the authors during the convention for a prompt for us to read a book from. Do you have a prompt for us?
Yes, I would say to read a book from a self-published author. I feel like I need to support the self-published author community.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such a good one. And we're actually doing like a big indie initiative at the moment in the Fantasy Fellowship.
Oh,
And we're going to
great.
be spotlighting indie authors every month, like a book tour and everything. So because some indie books are just absolutely incredible.
They are, yeah, it's amazing. There's so many now, and I think there's some amazing books there that kind of might get lost under the traditional published ones. But no, that's so great.
In fact, some of my favorite books are indie books. So I'm so glad that like it seems at the moment that everyone is doing what they can to get behind them.
Yeah, no, it's really great to see.
Oh, Rosie, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you about mythology, which is one of my favorite things. This is like a dream for me.
Well, thank you for having me.
Success for the future, and we just can't wait to see what it has in store for you with all these very exciting retellings. Like I cannot wait to hear more about Medea.
Thank you.
Yeah, your Instagram.
Yes, no, I will. There should hopefully be exciting stuff I can announce soon. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us this session. We have other interviews and workshops on the schedule, which you can see on our website, www.fancy-fellowship.co.uk /con2022. Remember to follow us on Instagram, where we are fantasy_fellowship, and Twitter, where we are fan fellowship. If you have found the convention Discord for this event enjoyable, we also have a community Discord where you can chat all things bookish and be kept up to date with what's next. Bye, everyone.